one of the things that you can do is you can link parameters. So we remember back from last week where we had a stack of different parameters in here that you can change. So you can jump across to the modify panel. You can change parameters in here. You can link parameters from one object to another. So if I had draw another box to start with. If I've got a box and I wanted these to have matching heights, what I can do is I can right click on one of the boxes. Down here is a thing called wire parameters, and that brings up this little dialog where I can pick transformations. So I can look at position, scale, and stuff. But I can also pick an object's parameters. So I'll pick height. And then I can link that height to the height of another box. So that brings up this parameter wiring. And so what we're wanting to do is kind of just link these parameters on multiple different objects. So I'll do a two-way connection so that you can have a master slave where you can only change one object or the other. In this case, we'll have a two-way and we'll connect. And I'll leave that guy up here. So when I change, you'll notice that this guy changed. If I change the height of this box, you'll notice that they're both changing. I can still change the width and number of segments and stuff independently, but those height parameters are wired together. So this is quite useful, and I think there was a few people that pulled up Gaudi in their list of favorite buildings. This is the sort of stuff that, if Gaudi were alive today, he'd be doing this kind of parametric linking. So, with geometry. So you can sort of set up one piece of geometry that links to another. You can also put in expressions. So, let's just do a simple one where it's ×2 and update. So now if I adjust the height of one, the height of the other one is always double the height. And so this works with, all of the kind of mathematical expressions that you might use. So update, so now it's half the height. And I can change this guy. So if I made this 50 and I come across to this guy, the height should be, did I just do that? Yeah, so you get that relationship of 25 and 50. You can also then link, it doesn't have to be exactly the same parameter. So I could take, let's close that guy. I'll take the wire, let's use the height again, but I'll use the sphere and the radius. Let's do that, connect. So now the height of this guy has a direct relationship with the radius of the sphere. And so you can, and this is something you can explore. You can have things that are linked with movement. So it can be X, Y location and the slice amount of a sphere, for example. One of the things that I've used this in a very simple way, where I've taken the height of a kind of a building like form like this one, and I've adjusted the number of segments, so height segments, to be kind of related to the height of the building. So you kind of set up a one object linking to itself, but dividing the overall height by the number of floors. So you set up a kind of 3 meter floor to floor or a 4 meter floor to floor. So that's the kind of stuff that you can do with wiring of parameters. Ideally we'd show you that, you'd have a play with it, and you'd have some questions. But we can't do that so well. So have a bit of a play with that. If you have questions, post them in the discussion group. Another one is I think we might have touched on it last week. But one of the things that I guess you can do is, let me just delete all of those. Between objects, there are other relationships you can set up. So, so we've got these guys, and I think we did some modifiers last week. say you were twisting a box, you know, we can copy modifiers, which I think pretty sure we did last week, where we paste that on here. You can also do other kind of stuff with objects where you make a copy, or in Max it calls them clones. So under Edit, you have Clone here. You'll notice that there's 3 different types of cloning. One is a copy, and that is the least exciting of those options. So that's a copy. If I change this guy in any way, they're totally independent. So it's just a dumb copy. It's sort of like a SketchUp copy, for example. Another option we have is Edit Clone and Instance. An instance clone is far more exciting in that they are identical. So if I change the parameters of one, they will change on both. And that works its way all the way down the stack. So if you've got different heights, you know, different segments or whatever, all of that, they'll be just purely identical. So it's super useful for, you know, columns, and there's a range of stuff that you might use in architectural modeling. And then the other option, which is possibly even more exciting, I can tell that you're all excited by the looks on your faces, is the clone reference option. And if I click on that guy, I'll drag that out. You'll notice that there's a sort of bluey grey line here at the top of the modifier stack, and everything below that is basically an instance. So if I change the parameters on this guy, they change on all of them. But everything that happens above that line, so I think we had a bend last time, that will only happen to that guy. So you can do, these can be kind of identical except for the manipulation that you do on top. So here we've got a bend. We could do, what's another one? Those super useful, I guess, in the start where you're trying to think of framing and stuff, might be lattice, where you might stick some kind of framing on something. I'll get rid of the, it's a bit ugly. So that might be something that you might have a kind of framey version of the same thing. I'll get rid of the bend, and I will use the align tool and put him back over here. So now I've got, I mean, they're the same object, but the reference copy has an additional modifier on it, which is the lattice. So if I change the original, which is just the simple box with a twist, and went down into the stack, and I could add some segments, for example. Oops. There's, you know, a bad 80s tower with a twist. And that works with, well, you know, a range of, you know, you can apply any modifiers on top, and you'll have that nice relationship where you're kind of, you know, linking one object to another. Can't see the chat. Is there any questions on any of that? There'll probably be a stack in the next couple of days, but okay. So then another thing that can be pretty useful is again, it's the sort of relationships between objects, is using compound objects, or sort of objects made up of more than one object. So in this, we'll maybe just use, I'll just simplify that to make the point a bit more clearly. Say I've got a bunch of different objects, spheres, and I wanted to subtract these spheres from this box. You have, like in Rhino or AutoCAD, you can do Boolean operations. They are buried under here, so under standard primitives, so under the create panel. weirdly, it's not under the modifier. This is a sort of creation process. You go to compound objects, and there's a few different options here. And if you're ever having trouble with Booleans not working, it's worth trying some of the others. So there's Boolean, Pro Boolean, and Pro Cutter. Pro Cutter is more for if you're doing like CNC routing and stuff where you've got stock and you've got stuff that you're wanting to cut away from. Probably Boolean is worth a look. It's probably the sort of simplest to use. You start off by selecting your object, you click on Boolean, and then you're into the Boolean operations kind of interface. And in here you can choose different types of Boolean operations. So a good, probably a normal one might be Boolean subtraction. So I add the operand that I want to subtract, and I can add a couple. And then I have my object that's had the spheres subtracted from it. And then if I wanted to subtract another object from that, and this is something that I think you kind of probably have to do about 7 times yourself, and then work out that you're kind of causing a bit of a mess. But the temptation is to go through and go back to Boolean again in the Create panel. But what I'll say is don't do that. Go to the Modify panel, because you've got all of that whole interface is still there. So this object is, when I go to the Modify panel, it's that original box with the spheres been subtracted. And so what we can do is, if you want to subtract another sphere, you click on Add and you subtract another sphere. And that's all good and well. And if you used Rhino for a while, you know that that's a pretty straightforward set of things to do. But what you can also do, which I think is probably a little different to maybe Rhino, unless you're using Grasshopper or something. I think it has improved in the last couple of iterations of Rhino. But you can go back into the modifier stack, and you can change parameters. So this is my Boolean. I have access to the original box parameters, so I can change the size of that box. I can also change the spheres and the parameters of the spheres. And I can also move them around. So if I click in here, that will have selected that sphere. This is where naming things is pretty useful. What I can do is go into the sub-object, into the operands, and move that sphere around and get the sort of feedback of the geometry changing. There's a bunch of other stuff in here where you can do nested Booleans and stuff like that, but I think we might not go into that at this point. The other thing you can do, which is pretty useful, is change the operands or the operations that you're doing. So if I wanted that sphere not to be subtracted but to be unioned, so union will kind of combine the two pieces of geometry. And then the other one, which is pretty useful, is intersection, and that's basically where those two pieces of geometry overlap. And where this, and I think we could give it a try. Like one of those columns that our friend Gaudi does. Let's see, if we had a square column, if that had a twist on it, and if you had a mirror version of that, that was, let's just do it as an instance. So that, we could union those two together, but we could also do one of the kind of approaches that Gaudi used, where he kind of basically used a Boolean intersection, intersection with that column. And then you get, this would need more segments and stuff, but you get these quite beautiful pieces of geometry that are made up of this, fairly simple twisting box, very simple set of parameters that are added to with a simple modifier. But you're getting this very, complex piece of geometry coming out of that. So I think that's worth exploring. Any questions on this? This is going, gotta go, you gotta get on.